The morning started quietly, with the sunlight streaming gently through the windows of the restaurant, casting a warm glow on the polished wooden tables. The air smelled faintly of fresh bread and coffee, a comforting scent that always made the staff feel ready for the day. The restaurant was known for its elegance, attracting guests who were accustomed to the finer things in life. Their conversations were soft, but filled with the kind of laughter that came from people who felt comfortable in their wealth. To most of these guests, the staff were invisible, moving like shadows in the background, ensuring that everything was perfect without drawing attention to themselves. She moved among the tables with a quiet grace, carrying plates filled with carefully arranged meals. Each step was measured, each movement smooth, a dance she had perfected over years of practice. She had worked at this restaurant for a long time, and in all that time, she had learned to observe without being noticed. She watched the way the guests spoke to one another, the subtle gestures they made, and the way they sometimes looked at the piano in the corner, as if wondering who might play it today. She had always loved music, but it had never been a part of her work. Music was something personal, something she kept in her heart and on the small piano in her modest apartment. It had been with her since she was a child, a gift from her family, though it had never been something that the world had seen. She could play without looking at the keys, her fingers remembering every note, every melody, as if they had their own memory. But here, in the restaurant, she was just a waitress, and music was something she kept for herself. As the morning shifted into afternoon, the restaurant began to fill with more guests. Some were familiar faces, coming in as part of their routine. Others were visitors who had heard of the restaurant's reputation. The atmosphere was lively but controlled. Conversations intertwined with the soft clinking of glasses and the gentle hum of background music that was chosen to create a pleasant but unobtrusive environment. She moved from table to table, making sure everyone had what they needed, noting the little things that made each guest comfortable. A napkin folded just so, a refill poured at the right moment. It was during this steady rhythm of service that a group of guests entered who were different from the usual crowd. They carried themselves with a confidence that was almost tangible, their clothes carefully chosen and their gestures precise. They spoke in low voices, but there was an energy about them, a sense of expectation, as if they were looking for something unusual to catch their attention. She noticed them immediately, noting the way they glanced at the piano with curiosity, their eyes flicking to the corner of the room where the polished instrument stood, waiting. Her curiosity was piqued, but she continued with her work, keeping her attention on the guests at her table. She knew her role here, and it was not to draw attention to herself. Still, there was a quiet excitement that began to build inside her, a feeling she had not experienced in a long time. She moved with the same practiced ease, delivering food and drinks, smiling when it was expected, but beneath that calm exterior, her mind was alive with anticipation. The piano had always called to her in subtle ways. She could hear it in her thoughts, imagine the way her fingers could move across its keys, creating melodies that could make people stop and listen. Today, for some reason, that call was louder than ever. She tried to push the thought aside, focusing on her work, but it lingered, persistent and insistent. There was a part of her that wondered what it would be like to let the music out, even here, even now. As the day wore on, the restaurant became busier, and the demands of her job pulled her attention back into the flow of service. She carried plates stacked with precision, refilled glasses with a practiced hand, and smiled at the occasional comment or compliment from guests. Yet even amid the routine, her mind returned to the piano again and again. She imagined the sensation of pressing the keys, the vibration of the sound under her fingers, the way it could travel across the room and touch the people who were too busy to notice anything but the luxury surrounding them. She thought about the lessons she had had as a child, sitting for hours at the piano in her small living room. There had been no audience then, only the quiet encouragement of her family and the music itself. She had played in secret, learning every piece by heart, discovering the depth of her own ability without anyone to tell her it was extraordinary. The memory of those hours filled her with a bittersweet longing, a mix of pride and sadness, knowing that so much of what she could do had never been witnessed by anyone beyond her. Small circle. The restaurant's atmosphere began to shift slightly. As the afternoon moved toward evening, the natural light softened, giving the room a golden hue that made everything feel warmer and more inviting. The guests who had arrived earlier were engaged in conversation, some laughing quietly, others leaning toward one another to share a story. The group who had caught her attention moved toward the center of the room, their curiosity about the piano becoming more apparent. She watched from a distance, wondering if something unexpected was about to happen. She continued her duties, serving, with the same quiet efficiency, but her heart began to beat faster. She had no idea what was coming, but there was a sense of anticipation in the air that she could not ignore. The piano sat silently in the corner, its polished surface reflecting the soft light, almost as if it was waiting for her. She felt a pull that she could not explain, but could not resist. The staff moved around her, busy with their own tasks, but she felt a moment of stillness, as if time had slowed. The chatter of the guests became a distant hum, and all she could hear was the music inside her, the melodies she had carried for so long, waiting for the right moment to escape. She felt the familiar excitement of creation, the thrill of knowing that she could bring something beautiful into the world, even if only for a few minutes. Then, a voice from the group of wealthy guests broke through the hum of the restaurant. It was light, teasing, almost playful. They asked if anyone could play the piano. The request was not serious, meant more. The group laughed, and the sound was warm but dismissive, as if the idea that someone like her could play was ridiculous. She froze for a moment, unsure of how to respond. Her instincts told her to remain in the background, to continue as if nothing had happened. But another part of her, the part that had been waiting for this chance for so long, stirred. She looked toward the piano, and her fingers itched to move. She felt a mixture of fear and excitement, a nervous energy that made her stomach flutter. The room seemed to hold its breath, and she realized that she was standing on the edge of something unexpected, something that could change everything if she dared to take the step. She remembered the hours of practice, the dedication, the love for the music that had never been seen by anyone. And in that moment, she made a quiet decision to embrace the possibility. Her movements were small, but deliberate as she walked toward the piano. Each step felt heavier and lighter at the same time, a paradox that mirrored her emotions. She could feel the eyes of the guests on her, even if they were not looking directly at her. The energy in the room shifted slightly, a mix of curiosity, amusement, and faint skepticism. She sat down on the bench, her hands hovering above the keys, feeling the cool smoothness beneath her fingers. The world seemed to narrow to the space between her hands and the piano, the music waiting to be released. She closed her eyes for a brief moment, letting the familiar melodies form in her mind. She could feel the rhythm, the flow, the subtle rise and fall of the notes as if they were alive, breathing in anticipation. The nervousness that had gripped her a moment ago began to transform into focus, a calm determination that came from years of preparation she had never known she would need in such a public moment. She took a deep breath, feeling the tension in her body ease slightly, and allowed her fingers to press the first note. The sound was soft at first, almost hesitant, but it was perfect in its clarity. She felt the vibration of the keys travel up through her arms, a physical connection to the music that filled the room. The guests quieted, their conversation pausing as they turned their attention to her. She did not look at them. She only looked at the piano, allowing the music to guide her, to speak for her in a way that words never could. The first melody unfolded naturally, a gentle introduction that drew the listeners in without demanding their attention. As she played, she felt a sense of liberation, a release of emotions that had been held back for years. The notes flowed effortlessly, each one finding its place in the sequence, each one carrying a piece of her story. She could sense the change in the room, the subtle shift from polite amusement to genuine curiosity. The wealthy guests leaned forward slightly, their expressions softening, their eyes widening as they began to grasp the depth of her talent. The music was no longer just a sound. It was a bridge, connecting her to them in a way that transcended social status and expectation. The piano, once just a fixture in the room, had become a voice, and through it, she was speaking her truth. The melody grew in confidence, each phrase more assured than the last, as if she had been waiting for this exact moment her entire life. The moment she lifted her hands from the piano keys, the room remained unusually quiet. It was a silence that spoke louder than words, a pause that seemed to stretch just long enough for everyone to realize that something extraordinary had just happened. The wealthy guests, who had entered the restaurant with polite amusement, were now staring in disbelief. Their eyes met one another, silent questions passing between them. Could it really be possible that this unassuming waitress, who had been moving quietly among the tables just moments ago, had produced such music? She felt a flutter in her chest, a mixture of nervousness and excitement. The initial hesitation had disappeared the moment her fingers touched the keys replaced by a flow of confidence she did not know she possessed. Her mind raced, thinking about what had just transpired, yet a part of her was already reaching for the next note, the next phrase, the next opportunity to let the music speak again. She was aware that the guests were watching, but instead of feeling pressure, she felt a curious sense of purpose, as if the piano had been waiting for this exact moment for years. One of the guests, leaning slightly forward with a raised eyebrow, broke the silence. His voice was light, but edged with genuine curiosity. "Do you play often?" he asked, half as a joke and half as a sincere question. She shook her head softly, almost apologetically, though a small smile played at the corners of her mouth. She had played in secret, in the privacy of her small apartment, and occasionally for her family, but never before in front of strangers, especially not in such a formal and public setting. The words she spoke felt simple, but the truth behind them was anything but ordinary. Her fingers itched to return to the keys, to demonstrate more of what she could do, but she paused, sensing the delicate balance of the moment. She could feel the curiosity of the guests growing, a subtle shift from polite amusement to genuine interest. Their attention was now fully focused on her, and the atmosphere in the room had changed. The music had acted as a bridge, connecting her to them, in a way that nothing else could. There was a quiet anticipation in the air, a sense that something remarkable was about to unfold if she chose to take the next step. A waiter nearby nudged her gently, a small but knowing gesture that said, "You can do this." The encouragement, though quiet, carried weight. She nodded ever so slightly, grateful for the subtle support. The piano, with its polished wood and gleaming keys, seemed almost alive under her hands, waiting for her to coax more melodies from it. She inhaled deeply, feeling the familiar tension in her shoulders, and then letting it dissolve, allowing herself to become fully immersed in the music once again. As she began to play, the melody that emerged was more confident than the first. It was fluid and expressive, weaving through the room like a story being told without words. She could feel the vibrations under her fingers, the rhythm guiding her as she moved from one phrase to the next. Each note carried a piece of her past, a fragment of the hour she had spent learning and practicing in solitude. The room seemed to transform around her, the guests now leaning in, their expressions shifting from curiosity to amazement. There, eyes reflecting the emotion that the music stirred within them. She noticed small reactions from the crowd. One guest's hand hovered over a glass, forgetting to sip. Another leaned back in his chair, a soft gasp escaping before he quickly covered it. There were furrowed brows, raised eyebrows, and a few whispered words, all directed toward the sound. That filled the room. She did not look at them. Her eyes remained on the keys, but she could sense their engagement, their silent acknowledgement of the talent that had remained hidden until now. Each phrase she played was a conversation with the listeners, and in that exchange, a subtle bond was formed. The music began to shift in tone, moving from delicate and soft to bold and expressive. She allowed herself to explore the depths of emotion she had often reserved for her private performances. There was a sense of freedom in letting the melody take its course, a liberation she had not experienced in years. Her body relaxed, her hands moving effortlessly, as if the piano had become an extension of herself. She could feel the rhythm of her own heartbeat blending with the rhythm of the music, creating a harmony that was palpable even to those sitting farthest from the instrument. The guests were no longer thinking about who she was or where she came from. Their focus had shifted entirely to the music, the expression, and the skill that radiated from her. There was a quiet awe in the air, a collective recognition of something rare and beautiful unfolding before their eyes. The laughter that had accompanied the initial suggestion to play was gone, replaced by a respectful silence, punctuated only by the sound of her fingers dancing across the keys. She could feel their astonishment, their growing admiration, and it fueled her performance, giving her a sense of purpose she had never known she would find in a place like this. The piece she was playing began to gain complexity, intertwining layers of melody that flowed seamlessly. Each note was deliberate, yet there was a spontaneity to the improvisation, a sense that she was creating something new in the moment. She had always loved that part of music, the freedom to explore and express without constraint. Now, in front of a room full of people who had underestimated her, she had the perfect stage to let that freedom shine. She could feel the energy of the room, responding to each crescendo and decrescendo, the subtle changes in tempo, the quiet pauses that spoke as loudly as the notes themselves. A few guests exchanged glances, their expressions a mix of disbelief and admiration. One leaned slightly closer to another, whispering words that she could not hear but could sense in the tone of their voice. Another guest, who had initially been skeptical, now sat with an upright posture, his gaze fixed on her, hands as they moved with precision and grace. The room had transformed from a place of casual dining into a temporary concert hall, and she was the center of it, not through grandeur or position, but through the sheer force of her talent. Time seemed to slow as she continued to play. Each phrase felt longer, more significant, each pause more meaningful. She allowed herself to become fully immersed in the music, losing track of the world outside the piano. The guests, too, seemed caught in the moment, their attention undivided, their senses engaged in a shared experience of something rare and extraordinary. She felt a quiet thrill at the realization that her music had the power to capture attention so completely, to move people who had seen and experienced much, but had never expected to encounter such talent in this setting. The piece shifted again, this time to something deeply emotional. Her hands moved more gently, allowing the softer tones to fill the space. She thought of the hours she had spent practicing in solitude, the quiet moments when the music had been her only companion. Those memories infused the melody with authenticity, and the guests felt it, responding not just to the technical skill, but to the soul behind each note. Some closed their eyes, letting the sound wash over them, while others sat in stunned silence, absorbing the unexpected beauty of the performance. She paused briefly, a single note lingering in the air, holding the attention of everyone in the room. There was no applause, No words, only the unspoken acknowledgement that something extraordinary had occurred. In that pause, she felt a deep connection to the people around her, a shared understanding that transcended class, expectation, and assumption. It was a moment, a silent agreement that the music had spoken for her in a way words never could dot. As she resumed playing, the melody took on a lighter, more playful tone. She experimented with small flourishes, delicate trills, and gentle arpeggios, allowing her personality to shine through the music. The guests responded with soft murmurs of appreciation, their expressions warming, their initial skepticism completely replaced by fascination. The transition from emotional depth to playful elegance showcased not only her technical skill, but also her versatility, her ability to adapt and communicate entirely through the piano. The performance continued, and she felt an increasing sense of ease. Each movement was instinctual, a reflection of years of practice and a lifetime of love for the instrument. She thought about the moments in her life that had brought her here, the sacrifices, the quiet persistence, the unseen dedication. And in that moment, all of it culminated in this one performance, this chance to share what had always been a part of her, hidden yet powerful. The wealthy guests were captivated, leaning in, sharing silent glances of astonishment. They whispered to one another, acknowledging the rare talent they were witnessing. Their earlier air of superiority had vanished, replaced by genuine respect and wonder. She could feel the shift in their perception, the breaking down of preconceived notions, as her music became a force that transcended social boundaries. The piano was no longer just an instrument in a corner. It had become a voice, a storyteller, and she was the one guiding it, weaving a narrative that no one could ignore. The piece slowly neared its conclusion, the notes becoming more measured, each one carrying weight and intention. She allowed herself a quiet smile, knowing that this performance had achieved more than she had dared to hope. The final chord lingered in the air, resonating with a richness that seemed to fill the entire room. The silence that followed was profound. She stepped back from the piano for a moment, letting the echoes of her final chord linger in the air. The room had shifted in ways that were almost tangible, an invisible energy flowing between the guests and herself. It was more than just admiration. They were intrigued, amazed, and a little bewildered. They had expected a polite, light-hearted performance at best, maybe a few notes to entertain them while they dined. Instead, they had witnessed something entirely unexpected, a skill that seemed effortless yet profound, leaving an impression that would stay with them long after the day ended. For a brief second, she felt the weight of their gazes, a combination of curiosity and respect. There was no condescension now, no doubt about her abilities. She had crossed a line from being just a server to being a performer, someone who had revealed a part of herself that had been hidden for so long. She knew she could return to her duties, but the pull of the piano was stronger now, almost impossible to resist. It was as though it had recognized her fully, calling her back to continue the story she had only begun to tell. The guests murmured among themselves, whispers rising quietly like a tide, soft enough not to disturb the other diners, but loud enough to carry a sense of wonder. They speculated about her background, how someone so ordinary in appearance could produce music so extraordinary. Questions formed in their minds. Where had she learned? Who had taught her? Could someone so young and seemingly simple have spent years developing a talent so refined? None of their guesses could match the truth they were sensing, that this was natural, inherent, and deeply personal. Encouraged by the attention, she returned to the piano, her movements careful yet confident. She could feel the guests' anticipation, the subtle shift from intrigue to excitement, and it gave her energy. She placed her fingers gently on the keys, taking a deep breath, and allowed her mind to drift to the melodies she had kept close all her life. The first notes were soft, tentative, almost as if she was testing the waters, but they soon grew into a richer, fuller sound, each note resonating with clarity and purpose. She let herself be carried by the rhythm, her fingers flowing naturally, as if guided by an unseen force. The music started to tell a story, a narrative without words that swept through the room. She imagined the scenes she wanted to convey: quiet streets in early morning light, memories of her childhood, the gentle hum of life in her small apartment where she had practiced endlessly. Each note was a brushstroke, painting the emotions she had kept hidden for so long. The guests listened intently, captivated by the depth and nuance of her performance. Their eyes widened, some leaning slightly forward in their seats, drawn into the story being woven before them. She began to experiment with dynamics, the volume of the notes rising and falling like waves on the shore. The softer passages invited the listeners to lean in, to feel the subtle beauty in every sound, while the louder, more dramatic sequences commanded their attention and respect. Her hands moved in precise coordination, each finger contributing to the complex tapestry of sound. She felt a deep satisfaction in this expression, a sense of liberation that went beyond simple performance. It was a conversation, a connection, a way to share herself without saying a single word. Some guests began to react more openly, their faces softening with delight, some with tears glimmering in the corners of their eyes. The initial air of polite detachment had melted away, replaced by genuine engagement. They had not expected to be moved, not in this place, and yet here they were, caught in the spell of her music. She noticed a few people subtly nodding along to the rhythm, their bodies responding instinctively to the flow she had created. Room was alive, though quietly, charged with the unspoken emotions of those present. As she continued, she allowed herself to add small improvisations, flourishes that were entirely her own. Each variation felt like a dialogue between her and the piano, a way of communicating the depth of her thoughts and emotions. The guests sensed it instinctively. They could feel that this was not a rehearsed performance, but a true expression, a glimpse into a personal world they had no right to enter, but were somehow invited into. The authenticity was palpable, making every note more powerful than the last. The melody grew in complexity, intertwining layers that challenged her technical skill, yet flowed seamlessly. She had always loved this part of music, the freedom to explore, to move beyond the familiar and reach for something more profound. Now, with an audience that was both skeptical and enthralled, she felt a thrill unlike any she had known. Each chord progression, each subtle change in tempo, was a testament to the countless hours of quiet practice she had devoted to this craft. And for the first time, those hours were no longer private. They were witnessed, appreciated, and understood. She paused briefly, letting a chord resonate fully, holding it as the sound faded naturally. In that moment of silence, she felt the weight of the room's attention, the shared recognition of something extraordinary. The guests were not merely listening, they were experiencing, reflecting, feeling. She opened her eyes for just a second, catching the glimmers of astonishment on their faces. There was no need for applause yet. The music itself was creating its own acknowledgement. She had not only captured their attention, but also their imagination, a feat she had never dreamed possible in such an ordinary setting. Then she shifted the mood, moving into a lighter, more whimsical section of the piece. Her fingers danced across the keys with a playful elegance, weaving melodies that were both joyful and intricate. The contrast between the emotional depth of the earlier section and the lightness of this one showcased her versatility, her ability to navigate different moods effortlessly. The guests responded instinctively, some smiling, others leaning closer as if drawn by an invisible thread. The music was no longer just sounded, it had become a shared experience, a bridge between her inner world and the audience. She felt a rush of emotion, as she realized how completely they were engaged. These people, who had arrived with casual expectation and polite amusement, were now fully present, caught in the web of her music. It was a rare and exhilarating sensation, knowing that something she had nurtured quietly all her life could have such an impact. She allowed herself to savor the feeling, letting it inform her playing, giving each note the extra weight and meaning it deserved. The complexity of the piece increased, with multiple melodies intertwining seamlessly. She relied on intuition and memory, her hands moving with precision, yet a natural ease that made it seem effortless. She experimented with tempo, speeding up and slowing down to create tension and release, guiding the audience through a journey that felt both spontaneous and intentional. The guests were spellbound, their usual reserve replaced by visible engagement. Some whispered to one another, their voices hushed but filled with excitement, trying to express what they were feeling, yet knowing that words could not capture the depth of the experience. Her mind wandered briefly to the life she had led up to this point. She thought about the long hours she had spent practicing in solitude, the moments of doubt, the quiet persistence that had kept her going when there was no audience and no recognition. Each of those hours had prepared her for this moment, a performance that was not just about impressing others, but about sharing a piece of herself that had always been waiting for an opportunity to shine. She felt gratitude for the journey, knowing that every challenge and every quiet triumph had led her here. As the piece continued, she incorporated subtle variations, delicate embellishments that highlighted her personal style. The music was no longer just a series of notes. It was a living, breathing expression of her inner world. She felt a deep connection to the guests, sensing their emotions and responding intuitively through her playing. It was a dialogue without words, an exchange of energy and feeling that transcended the ordinary boundaries of the restaurant, the social hierarchy, and the expectations they had brought with them. The energy in the room was palpable, a shared awareness that something rare and precious was unfolding. She could feel the rhythm of their attention, the unspoken acknowledgement that they were witnessing a talent that defied assumptions. The initial laughter and casual curiosity had completely disappeared, replaced by a profound respect and fascination. The music was no longer just a performance. It was an event, a moment of transformation that touched everyone present in a way that would linger long after the final note had faded. She allowed the melody to build, each phrase more intricate and expressive than the last. The dynamics shifted gracefully, the softer passages inviting intimacy, the louder passages commanding attention. She felt a deep satisfaction in this expression, a sense of accomplishment that went beyond skill or technique. It was a connection, a communion with the audience, an understanding that music could speak in ways words never could. Each note carried emotion, each chord resonated with meaning, and each pause was deliberate, allowing the listeners to absorb and reflect. The piece reached its climax, a series of chords that were both powerful and elegant, showcasing the full range of her ability. Her hands moved effortlessly, yet with precision, as if the piano had become an extension of herself. She felt a rush of exhilaration, a quiet triumph that came from knowing she had captured the room calm. She leaned back slightly from the piano, letting her fingers rest lightly on the keys, feeling the vibrations from the final chords still resonate through the polished wood. The room had changed completely since she first sat down to play. The energy was electric but quiet, a shared tension of astonishment and admiration that filled every corner. Guests who had initially entered with polite curiosity now seemed genuinely captivated, unable to tear their eyes away. It was as if the air itself had been charged by the music, and everyone could sense that they were witnessing something rare, something beyond a simple performance. A few of the guests, who had initially exchanged skeptical glances, now looked at her with a mix of surprise and newfound respect. Their conversation had ceased entirely, replaced by the unspoken understanding that this was not just a simple act of entertainment. The talent they had underestimated had revealed itself fully, and it was undeniable. She felt a mixture of pride and humility, knowing that all her quiet years of practice, her moments of frustration, and her secret dedication had led to this instant, where her abilities could speak for themselves without explanation. As she adjusted her seating, her eyes swept over the room, taking in the expressions of the audience. Faces that had been indifferent or amused were now softened, some showing visible signs of amazement, others with eyes wide and fixed in quiet astonishment. There was a kind of reverent silence in the room, punctuated only by the faint clinking of a glass or the shuffle of a foot as someone leaned closer to hear more clearly. She had created a moment where attention and emotion were shared collectively, a space where the music could speak louder than any words or gestures. She let her hands glide over the keys again, starting with a gentle prelude that gradually grew in confidence. Her fingers moved with precision, each note deliberate but fluid, telling a story she had carried with her for years. It was a story of quiet perseverance, of dedication that had often gone unnoticed, and of a love for music that had been nurtured in solitude. Each chord, each phrase was infused with the depth of her experiences, her feelings, and her memories. She felt the room responding subtly, the audience drawn into the unfolding narrative of her music. The melody began to change, moving from soft, introspective passages to bold, sweeping arcs that commanded attention. She felt a thrill as she realized how completely she had captured their interest. There was no doubt in her mind, now that her music had the power to touch hearts, to evoke emotions, and to alter perceptions. The guests leaned forward, listening with rapt attention, some closing their eyes to fully absorb the richness of the sound. Each note became a bridge, connecting her past with the present moment, and linking her to the audience in a silent yet profound conversation. As the piece developed, she allowed herself to experiment with rhythm and tempo, adding subtle variations that kept the audience engaged. She navigated smoothly between the different layers of the composition, blending technical skill with expressive artistry. Every movement of her hands, every press of the key, carried intention and emotion. The complexity of the music mirrored the intricacies of her own life years of learning, moments of doubt, and quiet triumphs now translated into sound that resonated across the room. The guests could sense the authenticity in her performance. This was not just skill. It was expression, passion, and heart. Even the most sophisticated and composed among them appeared to be captivated by the simplicity of her story as told through the piano. They were witnessing more than music. They were witnessing a human experience, a journey that transcended social barriers and touched something universal. She played with subtle confidence, aware that her art had the ability to inspire and move in ways that mere words could not. Her hands danced across the keys, exploring the higher octaves with delicate, airy notes that seemed to float above the room, and then descending into deep, resonant chords that reverberated with power. She alternated between moments of intense passion and gentle, tender phrases, creating a dynamic flow that held the audience spellbound. She was aware of the subtle reactions around her, the guests shifting slightly in their chairs, the quickened breaths, the eyes that followed every motion of her hands. Every gesture, every note, was part of a conversation that went far beyond the formalities of the restaurant. She paused for a moment, letting a chord linger in the air, feeling the resonance ripple through the room. In that brief silence, she sensed the collective admiration and surprise of the audience. It was a quiet acknowledgement of her talent, of the courage it had taken to step forward, and of the beauty of the music itself. The moment was intimate, almost sacred, as though the room itself had conspired to create a space where this performance could unfold without interruption or judgment. Then she continued, shifting into a more lively and intricate section. Her fingers moved with both speed and elegance, the notes weaving a tapestry of sound that was both complex and approachable. The audience responded intuitively, leaning in, eyes fixed, some tapping their fingers lightly in rhythm, others simply absorbing the depth of the performance. She felt a thrill in knowing that she had transformed a casual restaurant setting into a space of engagement, curiosity, and emotional connection. The music was alive, and so was the room. Her thoughts wandered briefly as she played, reflecting on the years she had spent practicing alone, the quiet determination, and the moments of doubt that had shaped her. She realized that all those experiences had prepared her for this very instant, the chance to share her talent with people who had not expected to be moved, who had underestimated her. Each note she played was a testament to that journey, a reminder that persistence, passion, and love for something can eventually reveal themselves in ways that touch others profoundly. She allowed herself a small improvisation, a subtle deviation from the familiar, exploring a melody that had been forming in her mind. The audience reacted instantly, their interest piqued by the unexpected turn. Some exchanged glances, whispering softly in recognition of the skill and creativity she displayed. Others simply sat back, eyes wide, soaking in the music as it unfolded in real time. The improvisation was a statement, an assertion of her identity as a musician, a moment where her personality shone through every chord. The room seemed to hum with the energy of collective attention. She could feel the weight of their gaze, not as pressure, but as a shared appreciation. It was a connection she had never experienced before, a communion that transcended words and social standing. The guests were engaged, not merely as spectators, but as participants in a moment of human expression that was unfolding organically. The music had become a bridge, linking her inner world with theirs, creating a shared understanding that needed no explanation as the piece reached its emotional peak. She allowed the melody to soar, her hands moving with precision and confidence. The contrast between the soft, delicate passages and the bold, resonant chords created a rhythm that was both captivating and moving. She could sense the audience responding with each shift, a subtle intake of breath here, a small smile there, the quiet awe in their eyes that spoke volumes. She felt a deep satisfaction, knowing that the music had achieved exactly what she had hoped, to touch hearts and awaken curiosity. Her movements were fluid, guided by intuition and experience. Each phrase, each chord, was deliberate yet natural, conveying the depth of her emotions without a hint of pretense. She allowed the melody to unfold organically, trusting in her skill and the connection she had established with the listeners. The complexity of the piece did not overwhelm. Rather, it invited the audience into a journey, guiding them through peaks and valleys, moments of tension and release, all carefully balanced to maintain engagement and emotional resonance. The guests, now fully captivated, leaned in, some closing their eyes, others following her hands closely. The initial skepticism had vanished, replaced by genuine admiration and intrigue. They had come expecting a polite, entertaining display, but instead found themselves immersed in a performance that revealed not only technical brilliance, but also emotional depth. The music had created a shared space, a temporary sanctuary where their focus and attention were united by the sound, the story, and the presence of the performer. She felt a surge of confidence as she transitioned into the final section of the piece. Her hands moved swiftly and gracefully, articulating each note with care and precision. She introduced subtle variations, delicate flourishes, and a rhythmic playfulness that added character to the performance. The guests responded instinctively, drawn into the intricate layers of sound, their expressions reflecting a mix of awe, admiration, and quiet delight. The music had taken on a life of its own, guiding both performer and audience through an experience that was entirely shared. and completely unique dot as she approached the closing passages. She allowed herself to slow the tempo slightly, creating a sense of resolution and calm. Each note was carefully measured, each chord thoughtfully placed, giving the audience time to absorb and reflect. She felt a deep sense of fulfillment, knowing that she had conveyed something meaningful, something that went beyond technical skill. The music had become an extension of herself, a way to communicate in a manner that words never could, and the response from the... As the final echoes of the piano faded, she felt a moment of stillness, a calm that contrasted sharply with the rush of adrenaline she had experienced while performing. The guests were slowly regaining their composure, whispering among themselves, exchanging glances, and nodding in quiet amazement. Their expressions told her everything she needed to know. They had not only witnessed talent, but had been touched by it in a way that transcended simple appreciation. She could feel the energy in the room shift subtly, an acknowledgement of her skill, her presence, and the courage it had taken to step forward and share something so personal. A few of the guests approached her cautiously, their steps tentative, as though afraid to break the spell that had just been cast. They asked questions softly, their voices tinged with awe, curious about her background and the story behind her talent. She answered simply, with humility, sharing only what she felt comfortable revealing. She spoke of years of quiet practice, of moments spent alone at a piano in her small apartment, and of a lifelong love for music that had always been a private passion. The sincerity in her voice resonated with them, reinforcing the authenticity of what they had just heard. Others lingered nearby, hesitant to speak, choosing instead to simply watch her and reflect on what had occurred. They seemed to be processing, trying to reconcile the image of the unassuming waitress with the remarkable musician they had just experienced. The contrast was striking, a reminder that appearances could be deceiving and that talent often hides in unexpected places. She felt a quiet satisfaction in knowing that she had challenged their assumptions, not with words, but with her music. The staff of the restaurant, who had observed the performance from the sidelines, began to exchange impressed glances. Some whispered compliments under their breath, others simply nodded, acknowledging the extraordinary display they had just witnessed. The atmosphere in the room was electric, filled with a mix of respect, admiration, and curiosity. It was clear that her performance had left an indelible mark on everyone present, creating a shared experience that would not be forgotten. She allowed herself a small smile as she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. Years of practice, dedication, and quiet perseverance had culminated in a single moment where her talent could shine freely. The music had been a bridge, connecting her private world with a public audience, allowing her to share a piece of herself without fear or reservation. She felt a sense of liberation, a quiet triumph, knowing that she had expressed something deeply personal and that it had been received with genuine appreciation. The guests began to speak more openly, their voices now filled with curiosity and admiration. They asked about her experiences, about the pieces she had chosen to play, and about her approach to music. She answered with honesty, explaining the inspirations behind her melodies and the emotions that guided her fingers across the keys. The conversation was natural, flowing easily, as if the music had opened a door that words alone could not have unlocked. She felt a connection forming, a mutual respect that transcended the typical boundaries between server and guest. A few guests expressed interest in hearing more, gently encouraging her to play another piece. She hesitated for a moment, considering whether to continue, but the warmth in their expressions and the genuine interest in their eyes gave her the confidence to oblige. She sat back at the piano, fingers hovering above the keys, and allowed the music to guide her once again. The first notes were soft, delicate, inviting the audience to lean in and listen closely. Gradually, the melody grew in strength and complexity, weaving a tapestry of sound that was both engaging and deeply emotional. As she played, she noticed subtle reactions from the audience. Some closed their eyes, letting the music wash over them, while others leaned forward, mesmerized by the skill and emotion in her performance. There were smiles, gentle nods, and quiet sighs of appreciation. The music had become a shared experience, a way of connecting without words, allowing each listener to interpret and feel in their own unique way. She felt a deep sense of fulfillment, knowing that her music could touch people so profoundly, creating an unspoken bond between her and the audience. The complexity of the piece increased, incorporating both technical skill and expressive depth. Her fingers moved effortlessly across the keys, guided by years of practice and an intuitive understanding of the instrument. She explored variations in tempo and dynamics, blending delicate passages with bold, resonant chords that filled the room with sound. Each note carried emotion, each phrase told a story, and the audience responded instinctively, captivated by the unfolding narrative. The music was alive, and the room seemed to pulse with the energy of shared attention and admiration. She allowed herself to improvise, introducing subtle flourishes and variations that showcased her creativity and personal style. The guests reacted with quiet delight, exchanging glances and murmurs of amazement. They were witnessing not only technical proficiency, but also artistic expression, a glimpse into the depth and versatility of her talent. The improvisation added a sense of spontaneity and intimacy, reinforcing the authenticity of the performance and deepening the connection between performer and audience. As the piece progressed, she reflected on the journey that had brought her here, the countless hours of practice, the moments of doubt, and the quiet persistence that had allowed her to develop her skill. She thought about the private performances in her apartment, the late nights spent refining technique, and the unwavering love for music that had guided her through it all. Each experience had contributed to the richness and depth of her playing, and now, in front of an audience, she could share that journey through sound. The guests were completely absorbed, their attention unwavering as she navigated the intricate passages and expressive nuances of the piece. Some nodded subtly to themselves, appreciating the complexity and beauty of the music, while others simply listened, allowing the notes to resonate within them. The atmosphere in the room was one of shared experience and mutual respect, a testament to the power of music to transcend barriers and bring people together. She felt a profound sense of satisfaction, knowing that her performance had created an impact far greater than she had anticipated. She transitioned into a more lyrical section, allowing the melody to flow with a gentle, expressive quality that conveyed both emotion and technical skill. Her hands moved gracefully, each note carefully articulated, each phrase imbued with feeling. The guests responded intuitively, their reactions subtle but meaningful, reflecting the depth of engagement and appreciation. The music created a space for reflection and emotional connection, a temporary sanctuary where the audience could immerse themselves fully in the sound and story she was conveying. The performance reached a dynamic peak, with powerful chords and intricate passages that showcased both her technical mastery and expressive range. She felt a surge of energy as she navigated the complexities of the music, her fingers moving with precision and confidence. The guests were visibly impressed, some leaning forward, others closing their eyes, all captivated by the unfolding display of talent. The room was alive with the shared experience of music, a collective recognition of the skill, dedication, and heart that had gone into the performance. As the piece approached its conclusion, she gradually softened the tempo, allowing the music to transition into a gentle, reflective ending. Each note was deliberate, each chord carefully placed to create a sense of resolution and calm. She felt a deep sense of accomplishment, knowing that she had conveyed not only technical skill, but also emotion and authenticity. The guests absorbed the final notes, their reactions a mixture of admiration, awe, and quiet contemplation. The music had created a lasting impression, a moment of connection that would remain in their memories. When the last chord resonated and faded, she lifted her hands from the keys, feeling a sense of release and satisfaction. The room remained quiet for a moment, the guests processing what they had just experienced. Their expressions reflected genuine appreciation, a recognition of the talent and heart behind the performance. Some approached her to offer compliments, others exchanged impressed glances, all acknowledging the remarkable display they had witnessed. She responded with humility and grace, grateful for the opportunity to share her music and connect with the audience in such a meaningful way. The atmosphere in the restaurant had transformed completely. What had begun as a routine day of service had become an extraordinary event, a shared experience of beauty, skill, and emotional connection. The guests lingered, eager to continue engaging with the music and the performer who had brought it to life. She felt a sense of fulfillment and quiet pride, knowing that her passion and dedication had created something memorable and impactful. The performance had not only revealed her talent, but had also fostered genuine human connection, leaving a lasting impression on everyone present. She stood back from the piano, taking a moment to observe the reactions of the audience. Their expressions ranged from admiration to awe, their whispers filled with curiosity and appreciation. The staff of the restaurant looked on with newfound respect, recognizing the extraordinary talent that had been revealed in their midst. The performance had transcended. The hall had settled into a calm that felt almost sacred after the intensity of the previous performances. The audience, still buzzing with admiration and disbelief, remained seated, their eyes reflecting the lingering magic of the evening. People whispered to one another, sharing their amazement, but there was a common thread running through their words. No one had expected to witness something so extraordinary. The woman at the piano, once a playful joke in the mind of a famous musician, had become the heart and soul of the evening. She had transformed the room, the people, and even the famous pianist himself. She sat quietly, her hands resting gently on the keys, allowing herself a moment of stillness. The adrenaline that had fueled her through the performances was slowly ebbing, replaced by a sense of profound satisfaction. Every note she had played had been an expression of who she was, yet she had also felt the pulse of the audience with every chord. She realized that music was more than technique or practice. It was a language that connected people, an invisible thread that could weave hearts together in a shared moment of understanding. The famous pianist finally stepped forward, his usual playful smile replaced by one of genuine admiration. He approached her slowly, clapping lightly at first, then louder as the audience joined him. There was a quiet respect in the way he moved, a recognition that he had underestimated her talent in the most profound way. The joke he had intended had completely backfired, but not in humiliation. It had backfired in revelation. He had discovered a rare brilliance, one that could not be ignored or replicated. The woman glanced at him briefly, acknowledging his presence with a small, humble nod. There was no need for words. They both understood the gravity of the evening. He had called her to the stage expecting laughter or polite applause, and instead, she had shared her heart, her soul, and her extraordinary gift with hundreds of people. The applause of the audience filled the room once again, a wave of appreciation that seemed to lift the very air. It was loud, heartfelt, and uncontainable. People were on their feet, cheering, clapping, and whistling, and the energy of the hall was electric. She took a deep breath, allowing the sound to wash over her. It was overwhelming, yes, but also affirming. She had never sought recognition, never sought to impress anyone. Music had always been a private sanctuary, a place where she could express herself without judgment. Yet tonight, that sanctuary had expanded to include everyone in the hall. She had shared something deeply personal, and the audience had responded with awe and gratitude. It was a humbling experience, one that left her feeling both vulnerable and proud. The famous pianist stepped closer to the piano, now fully engaged with what had unfolded. He had seen countless performances in his lifetime, yet very few had left such an impression on him. Her music was not merely about skill or speed. It was about emotion, storytelling, and connection. Each note carried intention, each pause had weight, and every subtle shift in dynamics seemed to communicate directly with the hearts of the audience. He realized that she had turned a single instrument into a vessel for human experience. And that was something extraordinary that the audience continued to cheer, many still rising to their feet, clapping and calling out words of admiration. Some had tears in their eyes, others were laughing quietly in disbelief, and nearly everyone was smiling, caught in the joy of the moment. Children whispered to their parents, amazed at the beauty they had witnessed, while adults discussed the technical mastery and emotional depth that had been displayed. The atmosphere was filled with wonder, and it was clear that no one in the hall would forget this evening any time soon. The woman, still seated at the piano, felt a quiet sense of fulfillment. She had faced the stage without expectation, unsure of how she would be received, and yet she had captivated everyone. She had transformed what had started as a playful joke into an unforgettable evening, filled with emotion, connection, and artistry. The applause, admiration, and awe were proof that her music had reached people in a way words could not. She understood, perhaps for the first time, the true power of her gift, the ability to touch hearts, inspire emotions, and create shared experiences. The famous pianist, now standing closer to the front, clapped along with the audience. His expression was one of genuine respect, and there was a quiet humility in his stance. He had always been confident in his own talent, accustomed to being the center of attention, and yet tonight he had witnessed someone who had eclipsed expectations entirely. The lesson was clear. Talent could appear in unexpected places, and the most profound performances often came from those who played with authenticity, emotion, and courage rather than ego or pride. As the applause began to ebb, a few people in the audience began to approach the stage, still hesitant but eager to show their appreciation. Some carried small flowers, others simply offered words of praise, and a few shyly asked for autographs or photographs. The woman accepted their admiration with grace, offering gentle smiles and quiet words of thanks. She did not seek the attention, but she recognized the value of the connection she had created. Every interaction, every word of gratitude, reinforced the sense that she had shared something meaningful. The famous pianist finally spoke, his voice steady but filled with emotion. He congratulated her on her performance, acknowledging the depth of skill and artistry she had displayed. The audience listened quietly, many nodding in agreement, recognizing the truth in his words. He admitted that he had called her to the stage as a joke, and yet she had completely transformed the moment into something beyond imagination. His acknowledgment carried weight, not just for the woman at the piano, but for everyone witnessing the exchange. It was a reminder that talent and artistry could exist anywhere, often in the most unexpected forms. The woman responded with humility, thanking him and the audience for their support. She spoke softly, her voice calm yet filled with sincerity. She explained that music had always been her way of expressing herself, of telling stories without words, and that sharing it with others brought her joy. The audience listened attentively, many nodding, moved not only by her words, but by the honesty and warmth behind them. It was a reminder that true talent was not just about skill, but about the ability to connect, inspire, and communicate in ways that transcended technique. After a moment of reflection, the woman returned to the piano. She played a final, short piece, a simple melody, delicate and heartfelt. The notes were soft yet resonant, carrying a sense of closure and reflection. The audience listened in hushed awe, as if unwilling to break the spell that had been cast. Each note seemed to linger, echoing through the hall, leaving a lasting impression. It was a quiet, intimate moment after the intensity of the previous performances, and it was received with deep appreciation. When the final note faded, there was a moment of silence, a pause that allowed the audience to fully absorb what they had just witnessed. And then, once again, the applause erupted. This time, it was not only loud and enthusiastic, but filled with a profound sense of gratitude. People rose to their feet, cheering, clapping, and whistling, their faces reflecting joy, amazement, and admiration. The energy in the hall was electric, yet gentle, a shared recognition of something extraordinary that had been created in that room. The famous pianist approached the woman one last time, offering a handshake and a sincere smile. There was no need for further words. The mutual respect was clear. He had learned something invaluable that evening, not only about music, but about humility, recognition, and the unpredictable ways talent can appear. The audience could see the exchange, and many cheered again, celebrating not just the performance, but the connection that had formed between two musicians from very different worlds. People began to make their way toward the exit slowly, still discussing the evening in quiet tones. Some lingered, reluctant to leave, while others replayed the performance in their minds, savoring the memory. The hall, which had been filled with laughter, applause, and whispers, was now settling into a calm, reflective atmosphere. The impact of the performance was evident in every face, every gesture, and every conversation. It was clear that the evening had left a lasting impression, one that would be remembered for years to come. The woman finally stood from the piano, taking a moment to look around the hall. She felt a quiet satisfaction, a sense of completion, and an awareness that something significant had occurred. She had stepped onto the stage as a playful suggestion, uncertain of the outcome, and had left as someone who had shared her heart with hundreds of people. The applause, admiration, and awe were all signs that she had succeeded, not in seeking recognition, but in touching lives through the universal language of music. The famous pianist watched her one last time, his expression reflecting a mix of respect and humility. He had thought the evening would be light-hearted and entertaining, and yet he had been given an unforgettable lesson. Talent, he realized, was not measured by reputation or expectation, but by authenticity, courage, and the ability to connect with others. The woman had demonstrated this in a way that transcended the stage, leaving everyone present with a memory that would remain vivid for the rest of their lives. As the audience slowly departed, still discussing the extraordinary events, the woman lingered